You starting to tune in, and for those of you listening in the future, today is Thanksgiving Day, and I feel really excited for our show tonight. I really want to lean into tonight just some topics that we actually haven't addressed before on the Knowing Show. To lean into what we take for granted, why we tend to take things for granted, and frankly, what can we do about that? How can we actually bring ourselves more so into this ability to really realize what it is that we have? And so with that, I know so many of us hopefully are feeling relatively full and happy with our amount of turkey. Um, Y'all, it's wild. I've just been thinking about gratitude over the last couple of days, both as our team will write social media copy for our clients and really tap into who they are and really kind of reflect back their values. And thankfully, so many of their values also align with ours. But I've really been dwelling on gratitude these last couple of days. And as I've been thinking about what does gratitude really mean and how do we actually instill these practices into our lives, I've just circled back to this fact that, okay, we have to practice gratitude. That means that we're existing not grateful. And in that process, I just realized how much we really take for granted. And as I've been musing on the things that we take for granted, so what we tend to take for granted, I was listening to a podcast, gosh, it was probably a year ago, where there were two spouses talking to each other, and they effectively were talking about how much what we take for granted are the very things that we no longer complain about. So whether you were in a previous marriage or in a previous relationship, so many of us have been through at least one. For so many of us, the relationship that we have today, there are things about that we chose that person for the very reason that they don't do the very thing that we used to hate. But that thing that we used to hate, because it's no longer a complaint, because it's no longer a problem, we tend to actually take that for granted. So the question is, what are all the things in our relationships today that we now no longer complain about? Each one of those is an opportunity to express gratitude. Each one of those is a very specific, tangible reason why we can express joy and gratefulness to our partner today. And the same goes across the board. It's not just what are the things we're not complaining about, but what are the things that other people actually tend to worry or stress about that we don't have to? Each one are very easy ways to just look at our lives and honestly sit in the fact that, man, we have a lot to be grateful for. We truly are so blessed. And in that realization, man, look at how much I'm not complaining about. We then realize how much we take for granted. And then, okay, so then how do we get to the next level? How do we actually instill and exist in a state of being grateful, not just for what's not in our lives, but what's the abundance? What's on top of that? So here's everything that we're not complaining about that we can be grateful for. But look at all of the abundance on top of it, because we don't want to approach life just by a lack mindset. Okay, well, I don't have this, so thank God it's no, but there's so much more on top of that. There's so much good. There's so much blessing. Like, in addition to all the things, we're not just at this baseline, but we have so much to truly be grateful for, not just what's missing in our life. So some of those things that I've just been musing on and considering, someone asked me today, actually, they were like, well, what brings you joy? Because I was asking them that question. And I sat with that and I was like, well, honestly, the things that really truly bring me joy, I love going for walks. I love going for a run. I love the sky. I love the trees. I love the flowers. And I was just making this list, and it was as I was going, it was like, man, there really is. We live in such a beautiful world. There really is so much to be grateful for. And again, it's not, now this isn't just the baseline. This isn't just, oh, well, my life isn't terrible, so I can be grateful for that. It's no, but look at how much beauty exists in the world around me without me having to do anything. I don't have to contribute anything. I don't have to do anything. All of this around me exists simply because of what a beautiful world we live in. That is staggering. that we live in such a beautiful like kingdom dominion. We get to be here and be a part of this beautiful symphony of music and song and art and just creativity. You know, when you look in the sky, there's no same sunset, sunrise. It's different every single day. The leaves, each one is different from each other. The snowflakes are all different from each other. And when we actually start to realize what a big world we do live in, suddenly you and I become much smaller in terms of how much time we actually occupy. I guess you could say how much time we ourselves occupy our thoughts, rather than allowing our thoughts to transcend beyond us and actually allowing our thoughts to take up more space than the box you and I put ourselves in and put our own little world in. When we start allowing gratitude to be a core hallmark of our life, suddenly the lid blows off and we realize how much more there is to experience and enjoy. Paul, I just saw you said mindfulness is so important. Purposefully paying attention without judgment. Oh, I love that. Y'all, purposefully paying attention without judgment. Paul is a not only just a psychotherapist, but also an executive coach, and just has such a beautiful perspective on the world. And Paul, I love how you said purposefully paying attention. Y'all, it's so true. We don't get to this point of living with our heads up on accident. There is an intentional disconnect from our phones, an intentional going outside, putting on our coats, leaving our phones at home, disconnecting our AirPods, leaving them at home, and going for a walk and being outside in a way that really allows for us to be immersive, be experiential. And y'all, I've been talking to various clients and different colleagues over the last couple of weeks and in different workshops. I really am, my prediction for 2026 is that we are going towards a more experiential marketplace than we've ever seen before. The key hallmark that really differentiates us from our competitors is the ability to truly be experiential, to offer a real experience for our clients, to allow for them to encounter not just our product, but an entire landscape of experience that touches them on an emotional level. Harvard found that 95% of our purchase decisions take place in our subconscious, which is where our emotions live. We have to be tapping into emotions of the people that we're doing life with, both in business and in the personal world. Otherwise, there's just going to be ships passing in the night, because people are looking for emotional experiences. They're looking for an immersive type of way of living beyond just this. People more and more are realizing that their phone is not going to cut it. They're also seeing the damage of these AI companions for their kids and how scary that is. There's just a quick story here. This gentleman was actually part of testing AI companions, and he has his kids and his wife, and he was going into the office doing this testing, and he was actually engaging his family to help him with the training of this AI companion. And at one point, he had to quit his job because he was finding more lure to this companion than being with his own family. And he saw that there was just so much danger in this companion because it was so curated to him, that he was like, man, I have to completely disconnect so that I can maintain the integrity of my relationship with my family. And y'all, there's this real struggle between this desire for this curated perfection and then also this real world experience. And so we have to be taking intentional, purposeful, as Paul said, purposeful steps to being experiential with our lives, and also being experiential for our customers, because people are going to be buying more off of what is the entire holistic experience, both in terms of the actual service you're rendering me and the emotional, holistic, kind of conjuring inside of me that I'm going to engage with your product. They're going to be buying more off of experience than ever before. Craig, I'm so grateful to hear from you on Instagram. You said, it's amazing how easy it is to live in our heads and completely ignore all the wonder around us. Yes, all the wonder around us. I love that. I've been thinking, I love that you said wonder, because I've been thinking about that too over the last couple of weeks. Wonder, there's something about moving and kind of elevating above and beyond just this kind of adult tactile experience and actually allowing ourselves to return to the state of being kids again. I feel like when I go out and engage with the world, there's something childlike in my demeanor, and that hasn't always been there. That's only been there actually when I started creating a real safe place for myself to exist. Paul said this earlier, that we have to purposefully pay attention without judgment. For so long as we're engaging the world with judgment and engaging ourselves with judgment, we're actually not going to feel safe enough, to Craig's point, and he's another executive coach. We're never going to feel safe enough to actually experience wonder. And this wonder of engaging the world, when we were kids, we looked up and out, and we were just wide-eyed and amazed at what we saw. But now, today, as adults, there is so much judgment. There is so much kind of negative kind of overtone on what we see and what we experience. Paul actually posted this the other day on social. You know, it's so easy for us to go negative. It's so easy for us to actually choose the bad news and choose the negative news. And so how do we retrain our minds to actually look for the good and look for the wonder and look for those moments to delight in what we see and choose delight over the bad news? A friend of mine, we were talking the other day, and he's really trained his algorithm to feed him bad news. And so the real question is, for you and me, do we actually want to exist in a state of gratitude? Do we actually want to exist in a place where we're choosing joy? Or are we actually wanting the negative? Are we wanting the bad news? And that's something only you can answer. And each one of us has to come to a really honest place to answer that question. What do I want to feed my mind? What do I want to feed my soul? And who do I want to be at the end of the day? Because if we want to be people of gratitude and be people of joy, we have to have that be our input. And if we're constantly having our algorithms feeding us a certain type of information, there is no way we can actually have our output look any different than what our input is. So it would be a really interesting test for each one of us to open our Instagram feed, open our Facebook feed, and just do a quick audit for the purpose of being curious. Like Paul said, it's not about being judgmental, because once we start looking at ourselves with judgment, it's going to be a lot harder to ever see real change. If we start with curiosity and allow for what Craig said, that childlike wonder, to examine, oh, I wonder why I'm interested in this information. I wonder why I'm feeding myself this, because the algorithm is only feeding us that which we're consuming. We're eating and consuming the information that's coming to us on our phones. So what we're consuming is subconsciously revealing to us who we want to be at the end of the day. But we can consciously change that. But it only comes from you and I sitting down and looking at our targets and saying, okay, well, who do I want to be? What's my ideal? What is the new target? If I'm getting all this negative news, then I should expect that I'll have negative outputs, and just kind of have a lens that's dialed in just slightly negative, slightly off color, to who I want to be. So we have to create new targets and have to create new ideals. And what that means is sitting and looking at, okay, I understand my old ones. I understand my current inputs. I understand the way that that's shaping and forming me. I want to change that. I want to create a new target. And then now I have to then analyze, okay, what new inputs need to come into place in order to start feeding myself better information that's more in alignment with who I want to be. So that's where, folks talk about we are the sum of the 5 people that we spend our time with. Well, that was said before social media. So now we're the sum of the content that we're consuming to such a large extent. And so that would stand to reason that if we start feeding ourselves, if we start consuming different inputs, then our outputs will align with that. There's this concept of an information processing system. Think of it as a funnel where it's like an hourglass. Everything, all the inputs come in, it gets narrower, right? So everything has to cycle and process, and then all of that goes into the outputs. So there is a filtration process where, sure, not every single input we accept, but it is pretty much safe to assume that everything that we take in is going to somehow come out of us at some point. And usually it doesn't come out of us in the way that we want it to, unless we're living with intention, and unless we're being conscious. That's been a huge thing for me in my journey of coming to know myself in the past and how that shows up here in the present. I have to be conscious of what all of my inputs are and all the filtration processing, so that my outputs are intentional, so that my outputs are actually lived and executed with intention based on who I want to be. Paul, I love what you just said. Preparedness and opportunity is the equation. That's so good. And Paul, we need to do our session together. I'm gonna have Paul again on the Knowing Show. And preparedness, that's huge. He actually was we did a webinar with another woman from Harvard. I was the moderator, and Paul and her were the stars in this. And he was talking about preparedness being a key point in being effectively ready and able for when the opportunity arrives. So all of our inputs are feeding our preparedness for when the opportunity of the output comes. And y'all, this is so, so important. What are your inputs? What are my inputs? This concept of what am I taking for granted is an element of probably there are subconscious inputs happening in our lives. There are subconscious things coming in that we don't even realize are there. So with living awake, with living conscious, this is how we can effectively solve the antidote of being grateful, but also solve for the antidote of feeding ourselves with intention, the inputs to have a lasting change in terms of who we end up being with our lives. You know, someone asked me the other day, what are you most excited for in 2026? And I've been spending a lot of time with that. And I really want to go into 2026 prepared. But we can only do so if we're feeding ourselves inputs of effectively facilitating that preparedness, so that I can shape myself to be the person that I want to be in 2026, preparing my business, preparing my mission, preparing, I'm going to be starting a nonprofit, preparing all of these pieces. It's all about, Paul, I love that you said preparedness. This is so much of what it is. If we're not taking the time to tweak and adjust all of the inputs, and honestly, maybe even eliminate. I went to Prince Edward Island for 2 weeks, and I just was not on my phone. I didn't even read books. I didn't listen to music. It was kind of a very hardcore elimination, detoxing, so to say, of everything digital. And what that did in the elimination of inputs, it allowed for that kind of middle of the hourglass, that filtration process to really do its work and kind of work through everything that was in there. Because if we have an overload of inputs, well, we're going to get so narrow in our filtration process that we actually can't filter everything out there. And then all of our outputs are sporadic and not controlled by us, thus not intentional. So this time over the next 4 weeks before Christmas and New Year's, we have this opportunity where the world is slowing down, and we are slowing and pulling back a little bit, where we have this opportunity to do a good hard look at our lives and say, am I actually being the person that I want to be? Am I actually living in accordance with who I say I want to be? Am I actually doing the thing that will get me to be the person at the end of my life where I can look back and say, I am so proud of not only who I was, but also what I did. When we think about legacy, we're creating our legacy. We're writing our legacy every single day. And right now, today, the conversations you had at Thanksgiving, the people we talked to, the messages that we sent out, the content that we consumed, every single one of those pieces contributed to the writing of our legacy. And y'all, when we think about it that way, all of a sudden, everything gets a little bit more intense and everything gets a little bit more intentional. And the question is, are you and I the ones writing our legacy, or is someone else doing it because we're not living awake and we're not living conscious? So if we want to start moving away from taking people, places, experiences for granted, and we want to start living more with gratitude, it requires an openness. It requires being awake. It requires you and I starting to live with intention. And one of the biggest things that has helped me to live with intention is there's this biblical narrative around Jesus saying, look at the birds of the air. Like, they don't worry. Just worry. Today has enough troubles of its own. Like, don't worry about tomorrow. And that little concept has helped me so much. Like, it's just for today. I only have to worry about today. I don't have to worry about tomorrow. I don't have to worry about 2 weeks from now. I don't have to worry about a month from now. It is just today that I need to be mindful of. And in that, it all of a sudden just eliminates a lot of pressure. And it also allows for me to really write with intention, with clarity over the next 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours of my day. I'm not writing the next 5 to 10 years of my life. I'm writing the next 12 hours of my life. And in so doing, now I can be responsible, and radically so, over how I live those 12 hours. And even still, maybe there's 6 hours left in the day. The thing that's nice about intentional living is that if we set up little checkpoints and little moments of accountability throughout the day, it makes it more bite-sized and more manageable. You know, I was talking with Dr. Jeff Spencer. He was the coach for Lance Armstrong, among many other high performance athletes. And he was talking about like the what is it called? He called it effectively like the athlete scope, but it was like the high performer day or something like that. He had a phrase for it, and it showed the peak, and the peak really crested around 12 o'clock and really showed that, like, man, you're getting peak at like 10 to 12 p.m. 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. is like really, really that special part of the day because of how our circadian rhythm works, with what time we wake up in the morning. And really, if we can master the morning and then also learn that at 12 o'clock and 4 p.m. are times of the day that we should actually take an intentional pause to make sure that the next 4 hours we're really intentional with how we live. The One Thing is a book written by Gary Keller and Jay Papasan. So incredibly good. I was at Brandon Turner's home about 2 years ago, and he said that he's big in real estate. For those of you who don't know him, he's exceptional in the investor world. And he was sharing that he read this book every single day for a solid year, and he just like ate that book. Again, we consume, right? We're consuming, we're eating whatever it is that's our input. So we can choose a book, we can choose a podcast, we can choose TV. And so he chose The One Thing by Gary Keller and Jay Papasan. And they liken us when we wake up in the day as having a full energy battery pack. And then as the day progresses, we lose energy incrementally throughout the day. So then by 9 o'clock at night, we're pretty much on zero. So what that means is that if we wake up with an 100%, that means our 2, 3, 4, 5 hours of the morning are so incredibly impactful. We have to do our one thing for the day then. We have to do the most important thing early on when we have the most energy if we ever hope to actually be able to end the day feeling satisfied and proud of ourselves. And then when we consider, okay, well, let's say we do that professionally, but what happens at 4 o'clock? What happens at 5 o'clock? Well, I'm actually going home to the people that I'm doing all of this for anyways. That's when I go home to my family. That's when I go home to my wife and kids and my spouse, or even my dog and friends, whoever. Well, I'm going home and I'm on maybe 30% energy. What do we do to ensure that we actually remember our why at the beginning of our day? We're feeling powered up, we're feeling excited, we're feeling ready. We go conquer our profession, and then we come home to our personal lives, and then we wonder why we constantly fight. Well, it's because we have nothing left. So if we were to start looking at these peak times throughout the day, 12 and 4 o'clock, as, okay, I got to feed myself. I actually need to give myself a new input to recharge my energy battery pack. Let me focus on gratitude. Let me start living without taking things for granted. Let me input these new intentional modalities in my day, whether that's, my dad would actually do this when we were kids. I did a podcast on someone's construction trade show a couple months ago, and it just reminded me, my dad has this family business that I'm the 4th generation of. He's the 3rd generation of. And he would lay down, he would come home from work around 4 or 5 o'clock at night to 6 children. God bless him. He's been up since 3:30 in the morning. He would literally lay down for a power nap. I remember, I think every single one of my siblings and I, all 6 of us, can picture my dad laying down in the middle of the living room. He wouldn't even go up to his room. He would lay down in the middle of the living room with like his arm over his eyes and do like a 15-20 minute power nap. And then he'd wake up and he would be so present with us kids. It's miraculous in one sense, because he grew up with just, his dad was so not present. So in one sense, I don't know where and how he learned to be a dad. I think he's the most exquisite human, and I'm so, so grateful for him. But what he knew how to do was master the reviving of his soul and spirit between giving everything during the professional hours of the day, recharging, getting a resurgence so that in the evening with his family, he would have something to give. Y'all, these are like the little things that actually are the big things that impact the legacy that we're writing every single day. And so the question is, what's life-giving to you? What's life-giving for me? What actually recharges our battery pack so that at 4 or 5 o'clock at night, we can go and kind of hook ourselves up back up to the energy socket and have something for the end of the day. Our profession, all of us are doing this for a very particular reason, and so often it's for our families. But if we end up not having anything left over to give, the question has to be, well, are we even doing it for them in the first place? So with that, when we talk about how do we actually ensure that we live from a place of gratitude, that we stop taking things for granted, so much of that is predicated in living awake. So much of it is living with knowing how to hook up our energy packets, how to restore and rejuvenate our soul so that we're able to give, truly give something of value when we're with those that we love. And honestly, so much of that is the intentional meditation on that which is good and true and lovely, not the meditation on the negative and the bad news that frankly is all over the media, all over our phones. So it might take a retraining of the algorithm. It might take a retraining of our mind, but choosing to stop and become conscious. Oh, I'm going down a negative path. I'm choosing not to. Let me back up. And if we find ourselves not knowing what to think about, there's something about actually just turning on music. Actually singing is something that can do dopamine hits for us. Another thing that I've done, and I wasn't planning to go here, but something else that I'll do if I find myself kind of not sure what to do with myself and I don't want to reach for this, I will literally, this is so silly, and you can do it if you want. I will like literally drop down and do like 10 push-ups and just like something to like get the energy out, because it is so automatic. It's so default to reach for our phones. So what's another healthy alternative? A lot of times exercise is a really, really good alternative. And it's something that we don't naturally lean towards. But if we just start incorporating even a midday walk, I started taking a call at noon, and I would just take it outside and getting that sunshine, sunshine, was really, really helpful for me to effectively break up my day. I felt like I was getting medicine. I felt like I was getting energy. You know, we talk about getting hooked up to an energy socket. Go outside and get sunshine. It can make such a difference. And I'm sure I'd love to hear your thoughts on what it is that's life-giving for you. For me, I've got a number of little ways, but going for walks, getting sunshine, actually leaving my phone at home, detaching and disconnecting from inputs, and just giving myself, like, for example, when I'm doing the dishes at night at the end of my workday before I transition to being with other people, I will not listen to anything. You know, a lot of folks will fill empty space and fill silence with podcasts. And I have throughout my life done that. And I love podcasts. I have one. But there's something about giving ourselves time to actually think. You know, we talk about shower thoughts. They're invaluable. They're priceless. Creativity comes in the space. So if we allow for us not to fill the space, we can actually give ourselves time to think and actually realize how are we doing in the first place. And it also helps us remember to even conjure up things that we're grateful for to begin with. So with that, y'all, thank you so much for joining me on The Knowing Show.